Hello, my name is Jeremy Shaha. I'm one of the Earth Science teachers at Central Kitsap Middle School. This presentation is really meant to give you a little better idea of who I am and what we'll be covering this year in Earth Science class. I'm originally from Green Bay, Wisconsin. I received my bachelor's degree in geology from Michigan Technological University. I've actually always been interested in being a teacher, although as I was getting close to completing my bachelor's degree, I had a couple of other opportunities that took me to some other experiences in earth science before actually coming back to becoming a teacher. The first of those was right as I finished college. I had the chance to work for a geophysical exploration firm down in South America looking for oil. I spent about 3 years down there and worked in the countries of Guatemala, Peru, and Argentina. This is actually a picture of me with one of the drilling crews down in the jungles of Guatemala. After 3 years down there, I decided it was time to come back to the United States. I went back to school to get my master's degree in geology at the University of Wyoming. While I was there, I actually had a research assistantship where we spent the summers working on glaciers, studying glaciers up outside of Valdez, Alaska. The glacier I worked on was the Bench Glacier, which you see in the upper right-hand corner. Down below that is the base camp where we lived for the month each summer we were up on the glacier. And while we were up there, we actually drilled down through the glacier to the bed of the glacier, installed instrumentation to measure water levels within the glacier and thus determine how glacial movements, movement rates changed seasonally. After I finished my graduate work at the University of Wyoming, I moved out to Washington. I spent the last 15 years living on the Kitsap Peninsula. 10 of those years, I actually worked at an environmental consulting firm. While I was at the environmental consulting firm, I worked a lot on groundwater cleanup sites, the monitoring of contaminants at landfills, the cleanup of gas station spills. And I also did quite a bit of oversight on the drilling of water supply wells in eastern Washington. And so this here is a picture of a drill rig drilling down to acquire a groundwater supply for a vineyard in eastern Washington. After 10 years working at the environmental consulting firm, I decided it's time to go back and get my teacher certification. As part of that process, I spent a year as a student teacher here at Central Kitsap Middle School under the supervision of Cindy Taylor. Once I completed my teacher certification, I spent a few years as a substitute before becoming the full-time earth science teacher once Cindy retired a few years ago. So what are my goals in teaching earth science? First and foremost is to provide a safe and comfortable learning environment for all the students. Everybody should have an opportunity to learn based on the way they learn best. And so it's extremely important that I provide a comfortable learning environment for all the students. It's also important that I provide varied learning opportunities. We know that students learn in different ways, and so it's necessary to provide different ways of teaching them, different methods of learning. And so being in a science classroom, we're lucky enough to have the opportunity to go to lab benches quite a bit to conduct scientific experiments. We are lucky enough to have quite a bit of scientific technology to actually collect real-life data, whether that be temperature measurements or measure magnetic fields, things like that. So students will have a lot of time working at lab benches. We'll also work in smaller groups from time to time, and also work as individuals reading through and comprehending more complex scientific articles and things like that. In addition, throughout the year, we'll use the scientific method. Students will learn the importance of the scientific method and how it's used in science. They'll learn how to come up with hypotheses. They'll learn how to create experiments to test their hypotheses. They'll learn how to collect data through experiments, learn how to analyze that data, learn to come up with conclusions based on what they see in their data. So that'll be used throughout the year. Also, based on my real life experiences, I think it's important to bring the real life applications back into the classroom. I think it's important students realize that all this knowledge they're gaining through the classes is not just book work. It's stuff that has real life applications, and that if they're interested in pursuing careers in science afterwards, these are some of the options they can pursue. And kind of to that same extent, I think it's important students understand how earth science impacts their everyday lives, whether that be to acquiring resources necessary to have a cell phone or to create cell phones, or whether it be understanding plate tectonics and predicting locations where earthquakes and volcanoes are going to occur. Most of us are impacted in some way by earth science. So to that extent, there are 4 main disciplines we're going to cover throughout the year. We're going to start off with the discipline of astronomy. Students will get a better understanding of how our universe, our galaxies and stars formed, how our sun itself formed. We'll then zoom in and look at how our solar system formed, how our moon formed, how the moon affects tides, how the tilt of the Earth determines seasons, things like that. We'll then move on and talk about the discipline of geology. Students will learn about how minerals and rocks form. We'll learn about different types of fossils and how we can use them to understand the geologic history of the Earth. And once you understand that, we can look at how continents move through the process of plate tectonics and determine the location of earthquakes and volcanoes. We'll then move on to meteorology. Students will learn about the layers of the atmosphere, how weather occurs in our atmosphere. We'll focus in a little bit on how severe weather occurs, things like tornadoes and hurricanes. We'll also talk a little bit about how climate varies across the planet and how climate has changed throughout Earth's history. Finally, we'll finish with oceanography. We probably won't spend a lot of time on the discipline of oceanography just because we have so much other material to cover. However, they do have a marine biology class at the high school, so if students have a strong interest in oceanography, they can pursue that once they get up to the high school. How can you stay informed on what your students are learning in earth science this year? I'm heavily dependent on the use of Google Classroom. I've already explained this to the students. I post all of the PowerPoints, videos, assignments, group discussions in Google Classroom, primarily because that way if a student is absent, they don't miss out on anything we covered in class that day. In addition, if students are struggling with specific topics, they can go back to Google Classroom, look through the examples we went over in class, and use that to better inform them on what we're learning at the time. There's really 2 ways you can access Google Classroom. You can either have your students show you their Google Classroom page, but a better way for you to access Google Classroom is through the parent guardian email summary. You can access a preview of this at the below website. Basically what it does is it gives you a summary of what the students are learning in class. It will show you a brief description of the topics we're covering. It will tell you the assignments that are due and when they're due, and things like that. So if it's something you're interested in doing, you can just provide us with an email address. We put it into the Google Classroom database, and then you can decide whether you want to receive daily or weekly updates. And it can actually be applied to all of the classes, so you can receive updates on all the classes at once. In addition, this year I'm considering continuing the professional student program. This is a non-academic based awards program that basically acknowledges students for completing all of their work on time, being in class without tardies, or not having any discipline referrals. So it's a monthly program. Students are acknowledged for completing each of those things each month and have the potential to participate in the end of the year celebration, depending on how many awards they have received throughout the year. Finally, if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to come in and see me during the open house. I'll be available if you want to see the classroom or have something specific you want to talk about. Otherwise, you can reach me throughout the year. Probably the best way to reach me if you have any questions or concerns is through email, or you can try giving me a call at the school. Thank you very much. I look forward to having a great school year, and feel free to contact me if you have any questions or concerns. Thank you.